So I have to start this with not just being a big fan. Outside of the Bible, the first book I had ever read was Ender's Game. And
Wow.
it was the first book. And now as a writer myself, it's interesting because I'm curious to know kind of the way you see the world. I mean, I meet some unique people, billionaires and all sorts of unique types, and their brains all operate differently. Your brain is very uncommon. Have you always known that?
I don't know that I knew that it was uncommon because I don't know what goes on in other people's brains. I assumed that my brain was universal in the sense that whatever I experience mentally is what other people experience mentally. I've since learned that that's mostly true. Mostly we humans think alike, our brains work the same way. And when I start trying to describe brain function to other people, mind function, usually they end up going, "Oh, yeah, I never thought of it that way." But we all function in similar ways. But the particular conclusions I reach, no, those are mine alone. And I learn that over and over again when people look at me as if I were insane. And I go, well, but I'm actually right, but that's okay. Let's not argue about it.
You know, that takes courage, though, Scott, because you are firm in your position, yet you're still a learner. So how do you find that balance of the knower versus the
Well,
learner?
it's a principle called abeyance, holding things in abeyance. You get an opinion because you think the world works a certain way, but you're holding it as if it were in a spoon about to be served, and you never serve it until you're sure it's right, until you have corroborating evidence. And so there are things that I believe very strongly, but I also believe that I might be wrong. I believe that I might be wrong, not in the sense that I'm flat wrong, though that can happen too, but in the sense that my comprehension, my overall picture of the thing is always going to be incomplete. There will always be contributing causes and results that I don't know, that I don't understand, that I don't guess at. And so I have to constantly remain prepared to be surprised, not to necessarily instantly believe whatever new information comes, but to hold it in abeyance, to wait, to make a final decision. Now, that sounds as if I'm sort of spending my entire life poised like a ballet dancer on point, waiting to tip, but it's not really true. I think we all live that way. Sometimes, though, we're so sure of what we're sure of that we resist the new information with great strength and power. And yet it's a completely irrational process. This is not done by logic. It's not done by the weight of evidence. It's done by what we happen to believe about the sources we're using. You know, do I take this source seriously? Some I take more seriously than others. Right now, listening to news media, I don't take any of it seriously. It's all a joke because I know how much lying is going on. If anybody's ever had the experience of listening to national news reports about something that you took part in, something that you were there and you saw what you saw, and you realize they have no idea what happened. Or maybe I don't, but I'm pretty sure they're the ones who are wrong. I was there, I saw. And it's hard, though, to hold on to your mental decisions in the face of relentless propaganda. Propaganda works because when everybody is saying something, then to say something otherwise makes you feel insane, even to yourself.
So then I
How
have to
can I
ask,
think?
because
Yeah.
you gave me permission once to always jump in because you're like
Yes,
me.
yes, because
Yeah.
I'll never stop. I'll never stop.
I'm the same way. My wife says the same thing about me. So you have this high performance brain. And you're
Medium
yeah,
performance.
well, I would say I'm the writer here. I get to decide.
Okay.
But you're an overthinker. So talk about that, overthinking things, because you'll keep going and going and going. And I read something a while back in Malta, and on the road, somebody had painted this, and I think they allowed it, but it said, I watched the greatest minds of my generation destroyed by madness. I mean, overthinking can tend to lead to that, can it not?
I'm not sure though what you mean by overthinking. Um, I don't know if that's even, if by overthinking you mean reaching conclusions and then trying to make new conclusions based on the previous conclusions without having reality check, then yeah, everybody does that sometimes to some degree. Many people get it not by thinking up something, but by being told something and then absolutely believing it no matter what. That's not me. But there are things that I have come to believe, but I try not to overthink it. Maybe let me use a different term that might or might not be similar. Overclaiming. And this happens in the world of science and a lot of other areas too, where you come upon an idea and immediately you extrapolate all kinds of other ideas from it. And then you claim that you now know something that in fact you have no way of knowing. The thing that we're hearing about current AI right now, I find to be a ridiculous overclaim. We have no idea what human intelligence is right now. How in the world can we expect to identify artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence just means really obedient, repetitive computer programming, so that you give a plethora of rules and the computer then is able to work within those rules to do something that almost passes the Turing test, that almost can fool you into thinking that it's something real. But we have no idea because we don't even know how we think.
So Elon has said that he believes, in his own opinion, that AI is a danger to humanity. You're saying that we can't even define humanity.
Can't define human intelligence. We can't define. I've read all the science fiction that he's read, and this worry that AI will take over is based on one deeply false premise, which is ego, the will to aggrandize the self, to make yourself bigger than you are. We have never yet found a machine that wants that we didn't program to do that, and which we can't switch off. And so we have these nightmare scenarios, not starting with, but erupting into film with the movie War Games, which was ludicrous. If you understand computers, you know that what you were getting was ludicrous. Most of the time in our media, computer intelligence is presented as a magic box, that things come out of it. We have no idea how, but it becomes intelligent, self-willed, and so forth. And it's the thing that I was annoyed with in the novel Necromancer, wonderful novel by William Gibson, but he had one artificial intelligence character whose only desire was to die. But he was the most active character in the novel. He was the character that made things happen. But he was also had a death wish, wanted to be extinguished, wanted to no longer have consequences, have consciousness. And so we can speculate about what an artificial intelligence might be like, but what we're really doing when we do that is we're speculating about human intelligence. What will humans do if we get a huge capacity?
There, because I need to know, are you an optimist in real life? I mean, do you believe that? I mean, because you've written the books that talk about the darkest days, the darkest moments of humanity, or what will be. I mean, do you still believe that humanity has ultimately a chance to survive, or do you think it's going to look nothing like it does today?
It's obvious that it will look quite different, because it always does. You know, take any 100-year span in history, and even when it's in the Industrial Revolution, of course, huge changes in culture and things like that. But between 1300 and 1200 BC, there are going to be really vast changes in the organization of the world, in individual cultures. It'll always change. Am I an optimist? I'm not sure what that means. Does it mean, if it means that I'm an idiot who thinks things will always turn out well? No, I'm not. Things don't always turn out well. And often the worst thing you can imagine does not even approach how bad things can be. But then often things turn out way better than you feared. You thought things, we knew that we were going to have a nuclear war. When I was a kid in the 1950s and 1960s, we knew it. There was going to be a World War III, and it was going to consist of nukes. And we didn't have that. Now, it doesn't mean we still won't, still could, but we did not have it. And now the greatest safety I think that the world has is the decay and corruption of the nuclear weapons. We have no idea if they work anymore because the mechanisms are very old. And how do you test them to make sure they're working? It's an unpleasant thought. And so we don't even know if we still have the capability of destroying ourselves. But here's what I think, the place where I agree with Elon Musk. We should prepare for the worst and have some idea of what we're going to do about it. Moving that, what was it, an asteroid off of its course, that was huge to me. That was a magnificent leap forward, because when you ask, what was the space program for? There are all kinds of things, military supremacy, communications, et cetera, but the biggest one was to make sure that we don't have life wiped out by another big rock. And we have in all of history, have had no protection. And now we have a glimmer of hope. The other protection against complete destruction of Earth is to get off of Earth, is to either find self-replicating artificial environments that lift us off of the Earth so that the destruction of Earth in one way or another doesn't wipe out all of humanity. The seeds of the species remain, or to find another planetary home. I don't think there is another viable alternative inside the solar system. The closest thing we have is not Mars, because it's too far away. It's the moon, because the moon does have pockets of oxygen that can be up. It could be made self-sustaining in the resources that you need to sustain life. It would require mining our air on the moon. It can be done. And in fact, the Chinese base that is being proposed, and that may be under construction, but I doubt it, but that they are talking about, they're thinking about, is near the best known sources of those elements that can be used to make a self-sustaining colony that does not need constant injections of new life-saving material from Earth. And that would be one of the greatest things that ever happened for the human race. I would be sad if it were the current Chinese government that was in charge of it, but that government won't last. It hasn't lasted. The government of Mao Zedong is not at all the government that China has today. And that will change again. It always changes. Even during the highly conservative phases of the Chinese Empire, there were still vast changes, not just caused by technological inventions, but caused by the personality and decisions of various emperors. And so we don't know what the future is going to be. Am I a pessimist? Yeah, terrible things can happen. I don't think that one of them is artificial intelligence destroying the world. I think that the greatest danger is human intelligence destroying each other or destroying ourselves.
That's a very interesting response. And it's one that, and I love because you put thought into it. You're like me. I know the internet lives forever. So anything you say is always out there. There was a TV show that came on a couple years back called Upload. And I thought the concept was fascinating. The ability to upload one's consciousness or upload one's brain in the moment of death. Your own take on this, because coming from a place of spirituality, are there conflicts that you see that you say that's a line I can't cross? Or do you think that that is something one should consider? At least most people, as you know, believe certain things based upon indoctrination. They never really come to their own conclusion. Someone else kind of filled it in. So
we always have to do that because nobody has life enough to learn everything. You have to take other people's word for it. But I'm not sure I've understood the question exactly. Why don't you try again? And let's see if we can.
The upload. There was a TV show that came out.
The
concept was around uploading
to record your brain. Okay.
That
so
one
it's
could
recording your
live,
consciousness.
Yeah, one could potentially live in some new sort of program.
Now, this is a venerable idea in science fiction, to preserve your intellect apart from your body's corporeal existence. I've used it a lot in my fiction. Do I believe it? Well, of course not. I'm writing science fiction. Uh, when science fictions, when the needs of my fiction butt up against my personal beliefs about the cosmos, I'm perfectly willing to set my beliefs aside for the sake of the story. So anybody who thinks they can read my fiction and thereby discover what I believe about the real world, at one very subtle level, that is true, but it takes real subtlety to winkle it out. And no, I am perfectly able to write fiction that contradicts my beliefs. I often do. In fact, I have to say I usually do, because my characters usually don't have the same opinions as me. And so they will have thoughts that I would never have, but I have to think them for them and write their thoughts in order to be an honest storyteller.
So we're going to go next into fame, because what happens is while you're out there doing this, there are people, I'll call them trolls, my word, not yours, that they'll come out and they'll say all sorts of things. So in the beginning, I have to imagine you were sensitive, but at this stage in your life or your career, it sounds like you know who you are and you're on firm ground.
I always did, and I always was on firm ground, but that doesn't mean that I'm not human. We humans have a deep instinctual need to be accepted and honored by the tribe. Whatever our tribe is, we are sustained by public acceptance. It's what was meant by fame back before the media could explode fame and make it be vast. Your good fame was your good name. It was the reputation that you had. And so within your community, you might be famous, but what mattered was that it be good fame, that it be something that enhanced your position among your peers. Now, I am not immune to that need, that hunger. And when I am repudiated by everybody, which is the thing that is now the favorite activity of certain groups, they can't create anything, but they can catch you saying something wrong by their definition of what is wrong. They try to take control of everybody's language, to take certain words and completely ban them, take other words and deliberately misinterpret them, but then make everybody else hold everybody else to their new weird definition. It's the most dictatorial thing that I've experienced in my life, and not because of government regulations, though that does get involved, but because of the social pressure of this small tribe pretending that they are everybody. We have no freedom of speech, no intellectual freedom of thought. When they first started passing laws forbidding teachers, professors, scientists to speak against global warming theory, I just thought, don't they know what science is? Don't they know that the moment you stop questioning, science has died? You're now standing on the corpse of science. And if you try to use force of law to stop science from moving forward, if you try to use force of law to stop people from thinking and saying certain ideas, you have decided that you are going to be that stagnant pool filled with pond scum that cannot sustain life. That's what I fear, is our intellectual destruction. An example from history that I only vaguely know, but there was an Egyptian doctor, physician, and I wish I could remember his name. All that comes to mind is the Greek Asclepius, and I'm pretty sure that's not who it was, but an Egyptian physician who used the experimental method and began to find actual treatments that worked. And we're talking ancient Egypt. But his followers all imitated his outcomes, not his process. They never understood the process. And so his ideas, while they were better than what had gone before, became locked in stone, and science was dead again. It had lived for his lifetime and no longer, because the disciples didn't learn to think the way that the master thought. Yeah. And I've watched that, with the various movements in literature. Cyberpunk, for example, was championed by Bruce Sterling, wonderful, intelligent, really brilliant man, who said science fiction has become so repetitive that we all live in this consensus future, because whatever it was that Heinlein and Asimov and Bradbury and Clarke decided was a cool idea, everybody else now thinks is a cool idea, and they're not thinking anymore. They're not inventing
So these are
anything.
purely idea thieves.
Well, it's not so matter of thieves as victims. That their stories are so powerful that we've incorporated the memory of their story into our mind as if they had some existence in a real world. And so you're still a really clever science fiction writer if you use the clever ideas of Robert Heinlein, which is obviously false. I mean, Heinlein's ideas were often very useful, and his methodology was clever. But Bruce Sterling was saying, why aren't we thinking like Heinlein of new things and extrapolating new possibilities? I remember in Sterling's story, Green Days in Brunei, or Brunei. I've never heard anybody say the name who lived there ever. And so to my mind, I'm still holding it in abeyance, whether it's Brunei or Brunei. It's probably neither one. But in any event, in his story, Green Days in Brunei, he had a character who built a set in their home, and that this was a common thing, that you would build your telephone setting so that you would have the right background. You have a magnificent background behind you, or a really cool flat painting. I don't know which it is. I don't know how far behind you it is. But what you see behind me is the actual wall of my office with art that I like. But it's also the place in my house that I would choose to be in order to show other people how I live and how I think. So he had that going, but then he also talked about people having to have a cutout mechanism in case of phone flashers. And I thought, in all of the years that science fiction writers were writing about the visiphone, the ability to have a telephone call that has a picture on it, as we're doing now, no one ever that I know of thought of the possibility that exhibitionists would want to show their genitalia to total strangers over the phone instead of having to do it on the street. I'm not sure whether it would have the same thrill for them, but my guess is probably. I mean, we have so many famous examples of people sending selfies that reveal way more than I want to see of certain people's bodies. And so, in effect, Bruce's extrapolation was correct, but it was also a new thought to extrapolate that behavior into a technological future the way that he did. What he wanted then was for science fiction writers to come up with their own futures that were different from each other's. And that's why Bruce seized upon the work of William Gibson, because Gibson had, in fact, come up with a world that was his alone and was writing multiple stories in that future world. And that world ended up being called cyberpunk. And here's the irony. It was immediately imitated by all the writers who can't think of ideas on their own. It was a formula that could be another consensus future.
It's the template.
Yes, the template is exactly right.
It's a template. So what I'm hearing,
then they changed it to be steampunk, but that's still cyberpunk.
It's still the same. It's still the same template. So, but then I would almost, what I'm hearing is that people are a bit of a mirage. And the ideas that most people come up with really weren't original.
I am so past the question of originality. We worship originality in our culture, and yet we have never seen it. We have no idea what originality would look like. We generally lock up genuinely original people because they offend our consensus reality. And so insanity can be defined as believing something offensively different from what other people believe about how the world works. And so when you're reading fiction, the fiction writer, without meaning to, without consciously doing it, will create a universe that works in the way that he thinks the universe works. He may not know that that's what he thinks because it may never have been a conscious thought. But it's going to show up in the fiction. The world will work the way he believes it works at a deep unconscious level. Most of the time, when a writer is creating a world that way, he's unaware of it, his readers are unaware of it. As soon as he starts to get preachy and tell you an idea consciously that he knows he believes in and wants you to believe too, then the reader will consciously notice it because it's obvious. It's obvious on its face. And if the reader disagrees, the reader will throw the book against the wall and move on to someone else. So we do our best proselytizing to our own viewpoint when we are not trying to proselytize at all. When we're trying to convince other people, they know they know what we're attempting to do, and they resist because we're human. We don't want somebody else to tell us what to think unless they tell us what they say at the university. Here is what all the smart people think. You're a smart person. You must think this too. And if you don't, then they go, oh, you're not as smart as I thought, because you don't agree with their viewpoint. That describes the faculties of most universities in the world today.
So that's that idea around consensus, that is saying we've collectively agreed, and if you don't agree, then there's something.
You're the crazy one. That's right. That's right. And I have two communities three, that I have to fight with that over. The first community is the science fiction community. My work from the beginning was viewed skeptically and with hostility by a great number of fellow writers, and I had no idea why. I do now, but and then there was the politically correct movement that turned into wokeness, and I absolutely, from being a flaming liberal and leftist to being considered a fascist arch-conservative without changing my mind about a single thing, tells you something has changed about society around me.
So, I mean, that's interesting. Is that now? Do you think that we are more receptive today to new things?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely
not. We are in a phase now where once something has been determined to be the law, the social law, the thing that you must believe, there is no forgiveness for anyone who violates it. There is no changing of minds. There is no attempt to converse and discuss. Discussion is over in this polarized world. And what's funny is both sides of the polarity insist that the other one is the complete cause of the polarization.
So it's we're the good guys, they're the bad guys.
Yeah, we're the smart guys. They're the robots. They're the automatons. And both sides are correct. The other side behaves like robots, and neither one can figure out how anybody decides things. How did we decide? When was it decided that the cause of the left was going to be treating transsexuals on the basis of what they feel like they are instead of on the biological basis? When was that decided? Was that ever discussed? No. All of a sudden, you were called transphobic if you didn't agree with that agenda, if you thought that there were things to question about it. The very fact that I'm saying this, it makes me, in the eyes of some, transphobic. I've never, one time in my life, I've encountered a person who was trying to transition, but didn't know the person well and don't care. It's such a minority thing that I'm sorry that they go through the struggles they go through, but why should I have to change my entire language, entire conception of biology to adhere to such a ridiculously anti-scientific idea? But if I argue in that way, then of course I might find myself walking through a hall and getting yelled at by pro-trans people because I am hurting them somehow. My having this opinion doesn't hurt a soul. In fact, it's actually very helpful to know that there are a few of us dinosaurs left who would like to see science treated as if it had some relation to reality. Because I keep hearing people from both sides say, follow the science as they repeatedly and consistently violate every principle of scientific thought, both sides of that. And I say both because there really are only two that can control the microphone. So I have that frustration that I have those two communities, the woke community and the science fiction community, which regard me as not just suspect, but in fact condemned. I'm a condemned building. No one can reside in that building. What they can't do is stop my readers from buying my books so far. And so as long as I have a publisher who is willing to grant me freedom of speech, Tom Doherty, my publisher, he and I have many topics that we don't agree about. And we argue, sometimes ferociously, about them. And he's still my publisher. He's still my friend. I'm still his friend. And I'm still a writer who listens to him and is grateful to him for what he's done for me. And so it's possible for friendship to endure disagreement. We just pretend that it isn't possible. And it's possible to respect somebody who has an idea different from yours. I have many people that I respect who disagree with me. And I always hold in the back of my mind the thought, what if they're right? What would that do to my worldview? And I try to make it so that my worldview can adapt.
So it's interesting, you have a lot of experience and you've come to learn a lot about a number of different things. You've put a lot of thought into, I imagine, everything you decide to turn into a hobby or anything you decide to put into your, to maybe that you eat or anything that you're watching and learning. So if nobody had ever told you how old you were, 71, had nobody told you that, how old would you be, Orson?
I would have to have some conception of age. And if I had some conception of age and what it meant to be certain ages, then I would have already been testing it against myself all along.
So would you act, I mean, I would say in terms of the standard, one would think of someone that's 71. Do you think you act your age?
I think that my body is acting its age, my body and brain. I have always had a terrible time remembering people's names. I started taking Prevagen, brain supplement, about 3 years ago, and immediately began to have a randomly better memory for names. It's not dependable, but suddenly I'll know somebody's name, which had never happened to me before. And so we'll be talking about someone, I'll go, oh yeah, here's the name. And to me, that is miraculous. But there's a limit to what Prevagen can do. I mean, remember that its basic ingredient comes from jellyfish, and they're not notably smart, though they may have a long memory for all I know. But I'm aware of deterioration. My body, 20 years ago, I was running 5 kilometers a week at least, usually 10. My body was in good shape. I could buy clothes off the rack in a store instead of having to go to the big and tall websites to find fat clothes to wear. But then, having had that experience, my second son, my third child, died at the age of 17. And well, even though his life was a hard one because he had severe cerebral palsy, so that he was never able to sit up on his own, never able to take a step, and never able to speak a sentence. Every now and then he would be able to get a word out, but it was so hard to fight against his body that he used basically sign language that he could do with us, not the American Sign Language, just his own signs. But when he died, I had not known how much my life depended on his existence. And I discovered that I didn't care. I didn't care about my health. I didn't care about writing. It used to be that when I wrote something good, I knew it was good while I was writing it, because I would get that excitement as if I were reading my own work for the first time. That hasn't happened now since the year 2000 when he died. I have to have other people tell me whether it's any good. Now, is that because I'm old, or is that because the vicissitudes of life gave me an experience? For the last few years, I've been undergoing various treatments for depression. But the thing that I could never decide, and I still don't know, is, am I exhibiting signs of depression because I have genuine reasons to be sad? Or am I depressed and then finding reasons to be sad to explain my feelings?
Well, I think
the human brain works both ways.
That's what I must ask you, because it sounds to me what you're saying is that you are hypersensitive.
Ah, no, no, no. I'm sensitive to offenses. I hold grudges, but I try to do nothing about them. I try not to act on my anger and my resentment.
Well, I'm more speaking of
And
conditions around you, because if
well,
you're having these moments where I will call it the flare up, and there could be a trigger, that those triggers typically are caused by something. You had to have seen certain patterns.
well, in a way, but the symptoms of that aging thing that worried me was um, there was a time when I could drive a car 24 hours straight without anybody to relieve me and not be in any danger of falling asleep. Now I can't go an hour and a half without a danger of falling asleep. When you start waking up on the highway, I'm still in the lane. I haven't drifted. I'm not chasing somebody close behind, but I was asleep long enough that I'm waking up from it. That's terrifying, because without the ability to drive a car, I really am trapped. It's like trying to work with a bad set of artificial legs. So I found two things that helped. One is the transcranial magnetic, whatever, they do impulses into your brain aimed at a certain point that's meant as a treatment for depression. But what it did was, the first year that I had that, I never fell asleep on the road that year. I commute 3 hours each way to teach my college classes, and that's a long drive, especially when it's the same drive every time. And so that made it possible for me to keep teaching there. But then I also traded in my car last year for one that has lane assist and collision assist, so that if I'm overtaking another car and I'm on cruise control, it will see how close I am to the car in front of me, and it will slow me down, and I will end up pacing myself at that exact distance behind the car ahead of me. And that means I'm not going to bump into anybody. And if I start to drift out of my lane, if I cross a line, it beeps, and the steering wheel vibrates, and I'm alerted. And while I have that, it's been working really well. But I'm also aware that as an old man, my sleep patterns are changing. And so I can't resist that very effectively. I've found certain things that I can do to make it better. But do I know I'm 71? I'm not sure what 71 means. I think of my wife's dad. When he was 70, he was just a guy. I couldn't tell the difference between him and 50 or his age and 40. But now he's in his mid-90s, and we can tell. Now he has to have a walker, and I have to have a cane, because I had a stroke about 10 or 12 years ago on the left side of my body, and I never lost speech. I was always able to, I trained as an actor. So even when the left side of my tongue, the left side of my face was completely numb, I could speak clearly, because I know how to hyper articulate so that people can understand me no matter what. So I come into a hospital speaking that clearly. They didn't take my stroke seriously, and I didn't get all the medical treatment I should have had until after the MRI, and then it's too late for some of the things with stroke. But anyway, since that time, I find that the last lingering remnant of that stroke is that I drift to the left when I'm walking.
Interesting.
I will bump into walls on the left side. My eyes are open. I can still see, but I suddenly find that my body is not quite where I thought it was. And what can I do about that? Absolutely nothing, except that lately, really in the last 3 or 4 months, I have found that if I stand too long, and by too long I mean 30 seconds, I start to tilt. I start to feel that I'm falling. And I'm not falling, but I think I'm falling. So when I compensate for it, I am falling then. The cure is the disease. And so is that be part of being 71? Yeah, I think, okay, my mom had that. And she spent the last 10 years of her life in a chair, not a wheelchair. She would fall out of a wheelchair. in a soft, easy chair where she was comfortable and wouldn't fall out, wouldn't fall over, because her sense of balance was gone. She had to lean against walls to walk. And I expect that I'll probably end up there. My wife is younger than me by a few years and way more healthy. She still exercises in a way that I don't. But she knows that her family has a history of arthritis. And indeed, she has arthritis and has to work on compensating for it so she can remain active and do the things she wants to do. We're all fighting those effects of age because, it's a truism. It's been said, we all start dying the day we're born, which is not actually true because our brains are still growing. We're still virtually in the womb for a while. But by the time we're about 20, 25, we're dying from then on. Some parts of life get better because we know more things. But what does it mean to be 71? It means that when I'm watching a quiz show in America called Jeopardy.
Great show, by the way.
Oh, I love the show.
I love that show.
Other people, well, my wife and I, that's the only show that we record and watch together.
It's excellent. I mean, you can't help but go, I just learned something new.
Yeah. But here's the weird thing. So many times, none of the contestants are even close to the answer. They're ridiculously wrong. Then I think, why did I know this? Because it was in the news when I was 10. Because it happened when I was 14. And my memory from 14 and 10 is very good. My memory from yesterday is nowhere near as reliable. And that's part of being old too. So things that I have recognized in other old people or that have been part of the media portrayal of old people, I start finding in myself. And I think, oh, okay, I'm getting old. And then really, this is the thing that I had to face when my youngest child died at birth, died within a few hours of birth. And then when my son died 3 years later, I realized I'm not immune. My family's not immune. Death will come to us all. And it'll come to me. And I won't like it when it comes. Because no matter when it comes, I know I won't be done yet. I know I won't be ready to go. I don't want to go. In fact, I want the body that used to be able to run 5K 2 or 3 times a week. That would be nice, but I don't have that body anymore. And my doctor assures me it's never coming back. That even if I exercise as I did 20 years ago, my body will not build up the muscle mass I need or have the flexibility I need. So my knowledge of being 71 is very practical, very hands-on. And the fact that I can't rely on many memories is frustrating. The fact that new people that I like, I can't remember 2 days later their name. Or when I hear their name, I'll go, I know that person. Who is that? How do I know them? But then I was like that when I was 20. So is that part of being old? Maybe it's just that I now recognize it as being old. I don't know. It's, when we're talking about self-knowledge, like every other person, I am very omphaloskeptic. I stare at my navel. I'm looking at what's going on inside my head so that I think, okay, when I'm thinking, do I think in language or do I only think that I think in language? Because when I'm in control of my thinking, it's in language. But do I actually think in that? And I have realized over the years, no, I do not. Because it's not that my head is ever empty, but the moment I'm observing my own thoughts, then my conscious thoughts become language because there's an observer me that I'm talking to. And that observer is the one who notices what I'm saying, who sees things that I don't see, who checks out my peripheral vision. And that part of my mind is wordless. If I think something there and then want to put that thought into words, then it moves into the talky part of my brain, the language part of my brain. And then there's still that other part watching. Now, does this sound like I'm insane? Maybe, but when I've described this in detail to other people, they go, oh, yeah. And I say, well, who is you? Who is yourself? Is it the language guy? Or is it the observer person who is judging everything you do, that's the part of your brain that makes decisions before you even know you've made them. And you only find out what the decision is when you try to explain to someone else why you're doing the things you're doing. And often your explanation is ridiculous because you have no idea why you're doing what you're doing. Because that deepest inner part of your mind is making the decisions. It's calling the shots. Now, is that the subconscious, the unconscious, the superego, the ego, the id? I don't care. I don't find that Freud's system was very useful for me. I don't think of him as a scientist. I think of him as a philosopher who claimed to be a scientist because it gave him much more status. But I have very low opinion of the founders of psychology. They were winging it. And I think I do at least as good a job as they do in studying my own brain to figure out how I think. But I may be wrong. I may be insane.
But that's how we started this out. And I must say, you know, as morbidity and mortality are for certain, what I've learned from you today is that to live a purpose-driven life, and that is what you've done, Orson Scott Card. You have lived a purpose-driven life. My definition, and one that I stole from someone else, was to find your gift, to develop that gift to the best of your ability, and then to give that gift away. And that is what you do. You're going on a journey, and you're telling readers like me. I was the young 14-year-old boy that only had dreamed of one day, maybe I can get Orson Scott Card to sign a book, because you had given me this ability to join you. You were going with or without me, and I could join you on that journey. And that is your purpose. You have this unique gift of connecting some of the most unique and odd and eclectic humans and around the world, but in a way that welcomes them in to your tribe. And I am honored to be part of that.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to know that you are part of that tribe. I've been delighted over the years as I meet people in autographing lines in bookstores to find out that I actually like my readers because nobody shows up at my bookstore because I'm famous, shows up at my signing. They show up at my signing because they liked what I wrote. And that means that these are my readers that I'm meeting. And I get to find out what they cared about, what mattered to them in the stories. And it's often not what I planned because I don't usually have a plan. That unconscious part of me is calling all my shots. Even now, even as I no longer trust it the way that I did before my son died. But I have to say the purpose-driven life is a hard thing for me because it is impossible for us to take any action that has no purpose. We always have some kind of purpose, some kind of intention, whether it's conscious or not. There's always a purpose. So nobody doesn't have a purpose-driven life. I did not decide on a purpose young. I had some ambitions. I had things that I was good at that I enjoyed doing and kept doing. If other people thought I was good, then I did it even more because then I had an audience. And you say that I was going there whether you were going there or not. Not true. I went in that direction because that's where you wanted to go. And so you followed me there. And so I got paid more for the books that did the things you liked. And I'm a human being. I'm perfectly happy to do the thing that makes money as long as it doesn't violate my conscience. And so if I can tell an Ender story that I'm proud of, that I believe in and care about, and knowing that it will make me 10 times more money than if I write a standalone, then I'm likely to write the Ender story. Only now, as I'm getting older, do I find myself wanting to write the standalones, because Ender has been very, very good to me. And so I can support myself from my royalties for Ender's Game while I write whatever I actually want to write. Secretly, what I want to write, what I've always wanted to write, is historical romance.
Historical romance. Well, I'm curious. So,
well, I mean, I grew up on Pride and Prejudice, Gone with the Wind, basically what my mother read. A series called the Williamsburg books. Used to be a trilogy, and then they grew. The later ones aren't as good because they leave Williamsburg. But the first three were written at the time that Williamsburg was being established as a site, as a museum, a living museum. And so these books brought Williamsburg to life. I still hold those stories in my head, scene after scene after scene. And then I look at good romantic comedies, which are so rare. They're so much harder to do than action films. Superhero films are a piece of cake now that we have CGI compared to creating human beings that people care about and believe in, so that they'll have a premise, a dumb, obvious premise, which you have to have in order to get a studio executive to give you money. If you can't express the premise in a sentence or two, you're never going to get funded, because people who don't know how to read are in control of the purse strings.
So I'm hearing you say like headline, give them that Wall Street Journal headline approach.
Yeah. It's the, I once almost sold a television series called This is Men in Black Meets My So-Called Life. That's the way you have to think in Hollywood, but that's not the way you think as a writer. If you're doing that, then you're just derivative and you're going to write crap anyway. But as a writer, you have to think of the people, the characters. What do they want? What do they need? And you have to find all of those things inside yourself. Because I don't know how you feel. How can I write how you feel? It's one of the ludicrous things about the whole trans movement is when somebody says, I have always felt like a woman. Go, you don't know what a woman feels like. You've never been a woman. What it is you feel like what you imagine a woman feels like. And that's all you can claim, having never had the experience. I can't claim to know how you think. I can offer a description of how I think, and you can see if it rings true for you, or you can go, wow, he really is crazy. And that's fine, because I don't know how you think. You barely know how you think, I think. And I know I barely know how I think. But I'm trying to learn a little bit more about it as I go.
And that's what's interesting. I'm telling you, I'm still getting to know me. And
Yeah.
as a father of 2 kids, I'm still getting to know me. And it's amazing how you can be you for years and still go, I think I'm still trying to figure myself out, because all of these new variables will enter and all of these new interactions will enter. And then all that stimulation will cause me to reconsider the things I thought I was certain on. To ultimately want to get me to a place to recognize that I get to learn from his story or history, her story, that what we're doing today is for our heirs. So looking out 200 years from now, your heirs, because you came from Brigham Young, a great grandson,
great grandson, yeah.
great grandson. And so what do you want your heirs to remember about you?
Oh, here's the sad thing. I really don't care. There are so many writers who did wonderful things that are completely forgotten, and so many very bad writers who are still practically worshipped. You know, James Joyce, what a crock, what a pretender. But he was able to persuade people that the crap he wrote was brilliant, genius, and people are still obeying that instruction, even though they find him unreadable without an instruction manual. Whereas J.R.R. Tolkien, who actually did write the greatest work of fiction, prose fiction in English, is still given no respect. Why? Because anybody can read him and understand him. Anybody. They don't need professors to explain anything. So, of course, professors don't value him because they're not necessary. He deprives them of a job. Same thing with Jane Austen. She was the first and the greatest of the viewpoint novelists. She still has things to teach us that we haven't quite learned enough from as writers. And yet she got no respect for years because A, she was a woman, but B, no one needed to explain her to anybody else. Nobody needed to have people explain how her culture worked because her books perfectly recreated her culture within their pages. She was writing like a good science fiction writer, where you don't need any outside source because the book contains its world as well as its characters.
So it sounds almost too much of knowledge, let's say from academia, can almost hurt then a writer's ability.
Sadly, I don't think so. Actual knowledge never hurts your ability. It's fads that hurt you. It's the consensus fads. It's the fact that Whenever I go to a convention of librarians or whatever, they have writers do readings from their work. The literary writers will always choose this paragraph to read. They did research. They were told they needed to have a controlling metaphor. So the controlling metaphor of their novel is geese. And so they researched geese, and they learned all the names of all the kinds of geese. And there will be a paragraph where they have to list all the geese. They have to show their research. You know what? Science fiction writers sometimes have that tendency. They want to explain stuff that doesn't need to be explained. But by and large, we resist that. And by and large, we don't fall in love with our own language. If I ever find myself writing something that I'm really proud of, I cut it out because that's going to distract from the story. My job is to be as invisible as possible while the reader is living inside the minds of my characters. If I get in the way by doing dazzling writing, then it's as if I wrote a play and there was this wonderful line that the audience just roars at and applauds. If I then jumped up on the stage and yelled, "Hey, that was me. I wrote that. I'm the playwright. I wrote that line that you laughed at. He said it, but I wrote it." What would that do to the play? What would that do to me? What would it do to my reputation? I would be seen as an idiot, a clown, destructive of my own work. And that's what they teach literary writers to do. They're not putting out knowledge. They're using techniques that don't work and that demonstrably don't work and that they are proud don't work, because it means that the hoi polloi will not be reading their work. Only the knowledgeable people will read it. And then they resent writers like me who make a living from our writing, because my writing is read by volunteers, by people who read it for itself, for the pleasure of it. And nobody reads their stuff for the pleasure of it. The other writers read it in order to figure out what they did to get Knopf to publish them, but not because they value their writing, very rarely. Then you have somebody like John Irving, who now and then writes something that actually has the common touch. Or the early work of, what's his name? Richard Russo, who was a working man's novelist. And he knew the heart of people of the working class and did not have to make them intellectuals. Compare that with people who are writing about mountain climbers who spend the entire climb talking about Moby Dick, and you realize the difference. Maybe there are mountain climbers who talk about Moby Dick all the way up the mountain. That's fine with me, because I talk about weird stuff with my friends. But they want us to think how literary this writer is because of his insights into Moby Dick. And so they've destroyed the present work. You remember only the discussion of Moby Dick, not what actually happened in the story, not who the characters were. So no, educated writers who come out of most creative writing programs, especially graduate writing programs, have been taught the opposite of the right lessons about how to communicate with the people of their generation. You know, it's easy to forget after we've analyzed them to death that Charles Dickens and Mark Twain were not writing for the professors. They were writing for the common people. Twain's books were being sold door to door to the common people because most of them never went to a bookstore. How would they ever hear about Tom Sawyer unless there was a salesman coming and reading from the book to them and convincing them to buy it? It's hard to think of any literary writers today whose work could be sold door to door. It's just nobody, because there's nobody who wants to read it.
And here's what I've learned from you since I read your first book and a number of them thereafter, was that your starting point was never ground zero. You set your starting point to be higher, and you called yourself to be higher, and that comes with a cost. Many are called, few are actually chosen. You are one of the chosen ones.
Sometimes.
You
Sometimes,
know,
yeah.
well, you know that. So look, you at 71, you said your memory, you may one day forget my name. I am the Count of Monte Cristo. I hope you won't forget it.
I can tell you that name I'll remember. There's no
So,
way I'll forget that.
so
But
I can only hope that at least I made you feel my respect for you and my admiration for you are truly unmatched. And in my world, it's earned because I have got to meet a number of my, I would say my idols, and all of them had let me down candidly. You are the one individual that I have now met twice in my life that didn't let me down. You made me set even higher goals for myself, because what you've accomplished, sir, in 71 years would have taken anyone else with any interests or hobbies or skills that you have many lifetimes over that. So while you might think that you have not done enough, I think to that TV show or that movie, The Greatest Showman, it was the Never Enough song. I go, you
yeah,
have set the bar incredibly high. And I appreciate that because I need to know that I'm possible, because people say impossible. I need to know I'm possible, that I can do those things. And that's what I have in you. You are immortalized. The members of the tribe, me included, we are thankful that you continue to share your journey and that you have not given up the story of Ender's Game. And with that, it has been an honor and a true privilege to take an hour from you. To me, time is precious for all of us. So from my heart to yours, sir, thank you very much.
well, and my heart in return. Those are words that you have no idea how much they mean to me. I may not believe that they're true in the sense that you have hit upon an absolute truth about me, but I am so grateful that it's true to you about me, because it means that maybe I've created a few things that might last a while. That would make me very happy. In the meantime, though, you know who it would mean most to me is if you took your ambition to write and did magnificent things with it, and then gave me credit for part of it later.
You know, our end here is the truth is stranger than fiction. And with that, thank you so much, Mr. Scott.
Thank you. This was my pleasure.